What is money? Is it just a cold piece of metal we carry in our pockets or a stack of paper in our wallets? Or is it an invisible bond that shapes human history, the fate of states, and the darkest ambitions of our souls? Throughout history, very few phenomena have been desired with such intense passion as money, and at the same time condemned with such great moral hatred. Religions denounced it, states tried to control it, and people gave their lives for it. So, how did these lifeless pieces of metal become the absolute God that rules the world? The answer to this question is not in numbers, but hidden in the dusty and sometimes bloody pages of history. Today, on the Mankind Atlas channel, we are pursuing the greatest illusion that connects humanity and raises and topples empires, the history of money. We are embarking on a magnificent journey from the sun-baked barley warehouses of Mesopotamia to the lion-stamped coins of the Lydians, from the dark usurer stalls of the Middle Ages to the digital data flowing at the speed of light in fiber optic cables today. We will see that money is not just a weight in our pockets, but a seal stamped on civilization. If you are ready to turn this brightest and sometimes darkest page of the human atlas, the story begins. The sharp-witted thinker of the 18th century, Voltaire, summarized this ancient weakness of humanity in his philosophical dictionary written in 1764, in a mocking but equally justified language. Writing about money is much easier than earning it, and those who truly earn it always look down on those who only write about money. Now, to feel the weight of these words, let us focus on the year 1514, on the mesmerizing painting by the Flemish painter Quentin Matsys, The Moneylender and His Wife. This scene is not an ordinary moment of trade. It is a silent witness to how a civilization's value system has changed hands. The man sitting at the table is not just weighing gold and silver coins. He is actually putting the reality of an era on the scales. The illuminated prayer book in the hand of the woman beside him promises the peace of the spiritual world, but the woman's eyes are captivated by the sparkle on the table, that is, those cold and lifeless objects. What is clashing here is not just faith and wealth. What is clashing here is humanity's eternal search for security. As Catherine Eagleton and Jonathan Williams emphasize in their book, The History of Money, money is not just a medium of exchange, but the materialized form of that vast and complex social relationship between people. Our story is not just the story of metals, it is the story of trust, betrayal, and the instinct for survival. Soon we will touch the coldness of silver ingots weighed on precise scales, emerging from the sun-baked lands and barley warehouses of Mesopotamia. We are beginning this magnificent, sometimes bloody, and always epic journey that extends from the first stamped coins of the Lydians to the dark usurer stalls of the Middle Ages, and finally to the digital figures circulating at the speed of light in today's invisible fiber optic cables. Are you ready to discover the true identity of money? We are going back to the dawn of civilization, to the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, to the 3rd millennium BCE. This is a world where money, in the sense we know it, had not yet been invented, but value was managed with a flawless system. Translation errors in sacred texts often mislead our historical perception. For example, in the book of Genesis in the Bible, it is told that Joseph was sold to merchants going to Egypt for 20 pieces of silver. Those who translated this text into English in the 17th century thought these silvers were coins jingling in our pockets. Yet at that time, there was no metallic currency in the markets. What the buyers of Joseph purchased was not a loose coin carried in pockets, but carefully weighed silver ingots on precise scales. In that age, money was not something counted, but a reality that was weighed. As Catherine Eagleton and Jonathan Williams remind us, in these ancient societies, the economy operated with a very different logic from today's free market. This was a redistribution system centered on kings and temples. Everything was collected in warehouses and redistributed to the people according to their profession and status. However, for this enormous wheel to turn, an unshakable accounting standard was needed. This is where silver came into play. Silver was so valuable and respected that it was not only a symbol of power and nobility, but also a measure of justice. When we look at the laws of Eshnunna in northern Mesopotamia, we see that even crime was measured in silver. The penalty for biting a man's nose was 1 mina, approximately half a kilo of silver, while the penalty for a slap to the face was 1/6 of that amount, that is 10 shekels of silver. Not only penalties, but also the sweat of daily life was weighed in silver. The ideal daily wage of a harvest worker was 12 C, equivalent to approximately half a gram of silver. C is the smallest unit in the Mesopotamian weight system. Its literal meaning is barley grain, or grain of cereal. The legendary ruler of Babylon, Hammurabi, had even fixed the debt and interest system in his laws based on silver. The interest rate to be applied to debts was 20%. But there was an interesting detail here. Silver was a high unit, used in long-distance trade and large debts. In the daily life of the people, barley took the place of silver. In fact, the Mesopotamian economy was built on a dual system in which silver and barley were indexed to each other. In this first phase of money, the hacksilber, that is, cut silver pieces we see, were the ancestors of today's coins. People would break the silver ingots or jewelry they carried with them into small pieces when making a payment and place them on the scale. This was a period when money had no face or name yet, and ruled only with its pure weight. Now we are moving toward the Great Revolution, where these heavy silver ingots will be replaced by small round metal pieces that are stamped and state-guaranteed to the world of the Lydians. We are heading south to the fertile banks of the Nile, to the mysterious world of the pharaohs. Ancient Egypt had a different perception of wealth than Mesopotamia. In the eyes of neighboring kingdoms, Egypt was like a treasure island. In a letter he wrote to Pharaoh Amenhotep III, the Mitanni king Tushratta expressed this situation with admiration. "In your country, gold is more plentiful than the dust on the roads." However, beneath this glorious golden picture lay a more systematic and less cumbersome weighing economy that drove the daily life of the people. In Egypt, the invention of money was still thousands of years away, but the measure of value was flawless. In the New Kingdom period, all payments were tied to standard weights with mathematical discipline. The basic unit was the Deben of 91 grams. Its tenth was called a kite. So, how did the system work in practice? Records reaching us from the village of Deir el-Medina, where the artisans working in the Valley of the Kings lived, tell us about a shopping method that still surprises us today. A guard named Amunmes wants to buy an ox from the worker Pinamun. The value of the ox is determined as exactly 50 Deben of copper. However, Amunmes does not have a 50 Deben copper ingot in his pocket. He completes the payment like a puzzle. He pays only 5 Deben in cash copper. For the remaining debt, he puts different goods on the other side of the scale, such as 30 Deben worth of fat and 10 Deben worth of fabric. The miracle here is this. For the Egyptian people, copper, silver, or gold were not just metals, but a common language that could measure the value of everything. In fact, the Egyptian word hedge, meaning silver, evolved over the centuries and began to mean money directly. The treasures found in the capital of King Akhenaten, El Amarna, provide concrete evidence of this system. The gold rings and silver ingots unearthed from the ground show how these metals circulated among the people not only as ornaments, but also as means of payment. However, this glorious system had a major flaw: time. From the smallest bread purchase to massive property sales, scales had to be set up, weights checked, and the purity of the metal tested in every transaction. The economy was trapped in a cumbersome structure that required weighing at every step. Humanity was on the verge of the Great Revolution, where it would be freed from this weighing burden and moved to the ease of counting. Now we are going to the lands of Anatolia, to the world of the Lydians, where the state seal will be stamped on money and trust will unite with metal. To the end of the 7th century BCE, to the heart of Anatolia, to Sardis, the capital of the Lydian kingdom. The Pactolus stream, which flows gently through the city, was carrying not just water, but one of the most sparkling gifts nature offered to humanity. Electrum. This rare natural alloy of gold and silver, formed spontaneously in nature, became the spark of an irreversible revolution in human history. The Lydians were determined to end the great cumbersome process of weighing these shapeless metal pieces in every transaction. With historical genius, they brought oval electrum pieces to a standard weight and stamped the kingdom seal, the famous Lydian lion, on them. This seal was not an ordinary stamp. It was the state's unshakable guarantee of that metal's weight and purity. As the famous historian Herodotus also noted, the Lydians went down in history as the first people to mint and use gold and silver in coin form. But the real Great Revolution took place during the reign of the last king, Croesus, whose legendary wealth inspired the expression "as rich as Croesus." Croesus saw the trust problem arising from the uncertain ratio of gold and silver in electrum and established the world's first bimetallic system. That is, he separated gold and silver and minted them in their pure forms as coins. Croesus trusted the power of this new system so much that he sent massive gold staters to the most sacred center of the Greek world, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, as a token of gratitude. A new dawn was breaking for the economy. Money was no longer weighed on cumbersome scales, but is counted with a jingling sound. The philosopher Aristotle summarized the reason for this change in its simplest form in his work Politics. To free themselves from the endless and tiring trouble of weighing in every transaction, mankind invented stamped coins. These small, stamped metal pieces not only accelerated trade, they also turned into a political weapon that carried the power of the state to distant geographies. The seal stamped on money was actually a seal stamped on civilization. However, this Anatolian invention would soon cross to the opposite shore of the Aegean, to the Agoras of Athens, and evolve into a much different dimension. Now we are sailing toward the ancient Greek world, to the first great alliance of democracy and money. The idea of the coin crossed the Aegean Sea like a storm from the Lydian lands and reached the Greek city-states. But here, money went beyond being just a piece of metal and turned into an unshakable social contract. Athens became the true emperor of money thanks to its enormous silver mines in Lorient. The Athenians minted so much pure silver owl coins that these coins became the common language of the entire Eastern Mediterranean, and even of the world of that period. This was not just an economic success, but a show of strength. On the eve of the Peloponnesian War, Athens prided itself on having a huge silver reserve of 6,000 talents in the Acropolis and 500 talents of unworked gold in the statue of the goddess Athena. In the Greek world, the place of money was so deep that the Greek word for money, nomisma, was derived directly from the root nomos, meaning law or custom. So for them, money was not just a substance, but a legal justice agreed upon by society. As society became more complex, those who managed money also took the stage. In the Athenian agora, tables where coins were counted, that is, the first banks, were established. The most striking figure of this period is undoubtedly Paetion. His story was like proof of the limitless power and transformation that money offered. Starting as a banker's slave, Passion first gained his freedom, then the management of the bank, and finally Athenian citizenship with his money management skills and intelligence. When he died in 370 BCE, he left behind a fortune of 60 talents, that is, exactly 360,000 drachmas, an unimaginable wealth for an individual. To understand the magnitude of this figure, it is enough to remember that the annual tax paid by the rich city of Byzantium to Athens was only 16 talents. However, this system evolved into a world order with the emergence of Alexander the Great of Macedonia on the historical stage. Alexander did not just conquer lands. He seized the enormous gold and silver hoards, estimated at 180,000 talents, that the Persian kings had kept locked in treasuries for centuries. By melting this idle metal and turning it into coins, he spread it throughout Asia. This was the greatest monetary expansion the world had ever seen. Moreover, Alexander began to stamp not just a city symbol, but his own image on money. On his coins there was his own portrait, with the ram horns of the god Zeus Ammon. Now money was not just a measure of value. It was the face of the emperor, the state's hand reaching everywhere and its unshakable authority. This absolute power of money would turn into a much more disciplined and ruthless system with the footsteps of a new giant in the west of the Mediterranean, Rome. In parallel with these parallels of the ancient world, let us also examine the monetary systems that developed independently in the East. In the 5th century BCE, these coins that began to jingle in the dusty marketplaces of India were very different from the round forms we know today. India achieved a rare success in the history of money by creating its own monetary system completely independently of the Greek world. Karshapana, or punch-marked coins, as Westerners call them, were angular and irregular pieces cut from silver sheets. Symbols, such as the sun, six-armed symbols, hills, and various animal figures were punched onto them like seals. Each of these stamps was an unshakable proof of which kingdom or guild the coin belonged to. In India, the view of money was not just an economic necessity, but also carried philosophical depth. The ancient statecraft guide, Arthashastra, argued that money was a vital organ for the security of the state. A discussion in these ancient texts reveals the social place of money with striking clarity. Between an attack on property and physical injury, the worse is an attack on property. Because the source of spiritual well-being and worldly pleasures is money, damaging it is the greatest sin that can be committed. For India, money was like an energy that turned the sacred cycle of life. Long before coins became widespread, there are interesting records in India's sacred Vedic texts about how value was measured. In that period, payments made in return for the services of priests, that is, the Dakshina tradition, were usually made with cattle or valuable neck ornaments called nishka. According to records, a leader named Risabhadatta paid a total of 3,000 head of cattle to the priests for a purification ceremony held after a war. In some ceremonies, enormous amounts ranging from 100 to 40,000 nishkas were paid. However, India quickly left behind this cumbersome cattle and ornament system. The coin examiner mentioned in the Arthashastra controlled the purity and weight of money and carried the state's authority to the markets. India's punch-marked coins were not just a medium of trade, but also a reflection of the Indian soul, philosophy, and state mind engraved in silver. In ancient India, money had penetrated so deeply into the capillaries of society that religious texts began to tell not only about spiritual salvation, but also about the transformative power of money. The Kulakaseti parable in the Buddhist stories known as the Jatakas is one of the most interesting and inspiring entrepreneurship stories in history. The story begins with a young man in rags selling a dead rat he found on the street to an innkeeper for just 1 copper coin to feed his cat. With that single copper coin, the young man buys molasses, distributes fresh water to flower collectors, and sells the flowers he receives in return, increasing his capital to 8 Karshapanas. Step by step, he has children collect wood and sells it to potters, gives water to grass cutters, and sells the grass he receives to horse traders, growing his fortune to thousands of Karshapanas. Eventually, with this capital, he buys a shipload of cargo and builds a huge fortune of 200,000 Karshapanas from that single dead rat. This story showed how money could be a key to freedom even in the ancient world for a talented mind. However, this rapid rise of money also brought conflict with the spiritual world. The Vinaya, which contains the Buddhist monastic rules, drew a strict boundary on the relationship of monks with money. A monk owning more than a quarter Karshapana of silver was a sin and a cause for condemnation. While religion excluded money, another faith group filled the gap that emerged with the growth of trade, the Jains. Jain bankers, who did not even engage in farming to avoid violence, so as not to harm insects while digging the soil, became the financial architects of India. By the 17th century, as seen in the memoirs of merchants like Banarasi Das, a trust network beyond physical money had been established in India. Thanks to instruments called hundis, a merchant could collect cash from a city thousands of kilometers away with just a piece of paper. But the most surprising truth of this vast geography is the money used in the smallest payments. In India, not only gold and silver, but also Cowrie, that is, seashells from the depths of the ocean, were money. These small white shells, brought by ships from the Maldives, were the only medium of exchange for villagers, workers, and small shopkeepers in the marketplace for centuries. The power of seashells was so great that even in the 19th century, in official British announcements, 1 silver rupee was equal to exactly 5,120 seashells. Here, money was not just a precious metal, but nature itself. While the Western world and India were establishing their own systems, China also created its own enormous monetary universe almost completely isolated from the outside world. While the Western world and India were establishing their own systems, China, almost completely isolated from the outside world, created its own enormous monetary universe. The philosophy of this universe was defined with clear pragmatism in ancient texts. The ancient Chinese text Guanzi writes, "You cannot wear money, but you can warm yourself with it. You cannot eat money, but you can fill your stomach with it." For the Chinese, money was not a blessing from nature, but an artificial but vital tool designed to govern society. That is why the first coins were in the form of agricultural tools used in daily life. That is, not round as we know them, but bronze knife and spade coins circulating in the markets. In 221 BCE, Qin Shi Huang, who united China and became the first emperor, put an end to this chaos. He made the round bronze coin with a square hole in the middle, called banliang, meaning half ounce, the single standard of the empire. This design was not chosen randomly. The round outer shape symbolized the sky, and the square hole symbolized the earth. More importantly, thanks to this hole, thousands of coins could be strung on strings and carried in huge bundles. The following Han and Tang dynasties continued this tradition with legendary coins such as Wuzhu and Kaiyuan Tongbao. However, in China, value was not limited to bronze. Silk and grain were also official money. In fact, with an edict issued in 734, it was made mandatory to purchase mansions, slaves, and horses, not with cash metal, but only with silk fabrics. Here, the term cash refers to the bronze coins with a hole in the middle in Chinese numismatic literature. But China achieved its real great revolution by signing one of the greatest inventions in human history: paper money. In the 11th century, heavy iron coins were used in the Sichuan region due to bronze scarcity. However, there was a problem. 1,000 large iron coins weighed exactly 15 kilos. When it became impossible to carry dozens of kilos of metal for a single shopping trip, merchants began using paper receipts they called flying money to escape this burden. During the Mongol Empire period, Kublai Khan spread this system throughout the country. When Marco Polo came to China, he noted with amazement how these worthless pieces of paper made from mulberry tree bark were accepted like pure gold. Of course, there were also scholars who resisted this new system. In 45 BCE, the scholar Gong Yu criticized the social gap created by money by saying, "The mother of all evils is money." The legalist thinker Jia Shan, fearing that money would become a power in the hands of the people, warned, "If the people possess these, they will be equal to the emperor." China's view of paper money deepened so much that it even reached a metaphysical dimension. In the tradition that continues even today, the fake Hell Bank paper money burned and sent so that ancestors can live in prosperity in the afterlife is the most interesting proof that China sees money not only for this world, but also as a tool for eternity. After this wide geography of the ancient world, let us return to the disciplined system of Rome in the west of the Mediterranean. In the 2nd century CE, when the Roman Empire was at its peak, the rhetorician Aelius Aristeides described this enormous power as follows: "Here are goods brought from every country and every sea. The city appears as the common warehouse of the world." However, Rome, the absolute ruler of the Mediterranean, had actually entered the glittering world of money with very slow and reluctant steps. In the beginning, for the Romans, wealth was not jingling coins, but cattle grazing in the fields. So much so that the word Pecunia, which means money in many languages today, was derived from the Latin root pecus, meaning cattle. Before coins, they made payments by weighing only shapeless and unworked bronze fragments called ace rude. But history cornered Rome. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps with elephants and reaching the gates during the Second Punic War confronted Rome with a huge financial crisis. There was no longer time to deal with weighing to feed the army and move the legions. Around 212 BCE, Rome created its own silver coin out of the relentless necessity brought by war. The legendary Denarius, worth 10 bronze as. This denarius would be inherited as the dinar in the Islamic world centuries later. As the Roman legions conquered the world, the entire wealth of the conquered kingdoms flowed to Rome like a river. This was not just an accumulation of wealth, but one of the greatest transfers of booty in history. In 167 BCE, after the conquest of Macedonia alone, 75 million denarii, that is, more than 300 tons of silver, entered Rome. This sudden and enormous wealth destroyed the old and simple moral foundations of the Roman Republic. The historian Livy bitterly complains that foreign luxuries entered Rome through an army in this period and that bronze couches and exotic foods corrupted society. The belief of the Numidian king Jugurtha that everything in Rome is for sale was not in vain. Senators were now bought with bribes and laws with silver. The outcry of the poet Lucan summarizes the spirit of that period. Trust has melted away and war has become nothing but a source of profit. The definition of wealth had now changed. The words of Marcus Crassus, a contemporary of Julius Caesar, are the clearest proof of how money was transformed into military power. No one can be considered truly rich unless he can support a legion with his own income. Politics had now become a quagmire of debt and an investment tool. At the beginning of his political career, Julius Caesar was in debt for 25 million denarii. This was the price he paid on the road to power. When Augustus came to power, he made money an unshakable pillar of the empire. By donating a full 600 million denarii from his own treasury to the state, the people, and retired soldiers. He had actually officially bought absolute power. In Rome, money was no longer just a means of payment, but a favor the emperor offered to his subjects and a silver chain that held the world together. However, this silver chain would break under the weight of inflation and economic collapse centuries later. In the imperial age, the coin was much more than a means of payment carried in pockets. It was the most powerful propaganda tool of the ancient world, the social media of the emperor that touched his subjects at every moment. Every new ruler would engrave his own face and promises on silver denarii and extend his authority to the most distant corners of Rome. This religious and political authority war even directed sacred texts. In the Bible, when a trap question was asked to Jesus about paying taxes, he asks for a denarius and, looking at the seal on it, asks the famous question, "Whose image and inscription is this?" The answer is Caesar's. Jesus' answer would draw the boundary between money and faith for centuries. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Excavations in cities like Pompeii, frozen by disaster, are proof of the abundance of money in that period. In the findings from the city buried under ash in 79 CE, it is seen that gold sestertii doubled the silver ones. However, behind this glittering picture of wealth, a silent monster was growing that was eating away at the empire. Inflation. When constant border wars and barbarian invasions began to consume the imperial treasury, Roman emperors resorted to the oldest financial trick in history. They secretly reduced the silver content in the coins. While a soldier's annual salary was 225 denarii in the time of Julius Caesar, and this money was close to pure silver, by 235 CE, this salary had jumped to 1,800 denarii, with coins whose silver content had been greatly reduced and devalued. In 301 CE, Emperor Diocletian published the first comprehensive price edict in history, the Price Edict, to extinguish this economic fire. The language of the edict was harsh. It tried to control the market by freezing prices and wages. According to the stone tablets of this edict, 1 pound of pork was 12 denarii. A barber's shave fee was 2 denarii per person. While a baker's daily wage was 50 denarii, the price of 1 pound of gold had risen to as much as 72,000 denarii. However, the emperor's threats and execution penalties did not work. Goods were withdrawn from the shelves and the black market took over Rome. The last major move to save the economy came from Emperor Constantine the Great. Constantine set aside the shaken silver system and introduced a new gold coin that would be an unshakable symbol of trust, the Solidus. This gold coin, also known as the Bezant in the Western world, would preserve its value for a full 700 years and become the dollar of the medieval world. However, this solid gold would not be enough to stop the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The monetary system was now evolving toward Europe's dark Middle Ages and the rising gold dinars of the East, that is, the Islamic world. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Europe sank not only into political chaos, but also into a deep monetary silence. Rome's enormous tax wheels had stopped, and gold and silver had withdrawn from the streets and been locked away in the dark treasuries of kings and feudal lords. The Frankish historian Gregory of Tours criticized this hoarding spirit of the 6th century with these shocking words, "You have everything you want. Your treasuries are full of gold and silver. You lack only one thing. You cannot provide peace." In this age when trust disappeared, money turned into nothing but a tribute tool. The annual gold tribute paid to the Hun Emperor Attila to protect the borders and stop invasions had risen from 350 pounds, that is 113 kilos, to a staggering 2,100 pounds in just a few decades. But in the east, Constantinople stood firm in the heart of Byzantium. The Byzantine gold coin, Solidus, known in the West as the Bezant, was an unshakable fortress of trust in the world of that period. As the merchant Cosmas Indicopleustes wrote in the 6th century, "This coin was accepted everywhere to the ends of the world, and all kingdoms envied it." This gold, the dollar of the Mediterranean, was the sole key to trade. It was ironically the Vikings who awakened Western Europe from this deep slumber. These warrior merchants of the north put silver back into circulation thanks to the trade routes they established. The silver pennies, that is, deniers, minted by Frankish and Anglo-Saxon kings, reached everywhere. The harshest proof of how money penetrated the social fabric was the vergeld in Anglo-Saxon laws, that is, the blood money for murder. The price of a life was enshrined in law as 100 gold shillings. By the 13th centuries, Europe experienced the silver boom of the Middle Ages. The mines of Freiburg and Kutna Hora in Bohemia gushed nearly 25 tons of silver from the ground every year. This metal flood gave birth to Venice's thick silver grosso, France's gros tournois, and England's groat. But the real revolution took place not in the mines, but in minds and on paper. The great thinker of the period, Nicole Oresme, was redefining the nature of money. Money does not directly provide the necessities of life. It is only an artificial tool that facilitates the circulation of natural wealth. Oresme described kings reducing the metal content in money as an evil. It was at this very point that Florentine and Genoese bankers, trying to overcome the church's strict interest bans, took the stage. They invented bills of exchange, that is, promissory notes, to eliminate the risks of physically carrying money. Now a merchant could collect the gold he deposited in Florence with a piece of paper in London. This was the moment when money became dematerialized and modern banking began. Finance became so powerful that Florence's public debt jumped from 50,000 florins to 3 million florins in just 1 century. Money had now turned from being just a metal into a credit and debt game. Islam, which emerged in the burning sands of Arabia in the 7th century, shook not only the spiritual structure of society, but also the materialist nature of money up to that day to its roots. The new faith took the harshest stance against money turning into a tool of exploitation. The Quran strictly prohibited interest, that is riba, declaring that money should only be a tool for legitimate trade. That shocking warning against interest summarized the effect of money in the spiritual world as follows: "Those who consume interest stand as one whom Satan has struck with madness stands." In the language of the prophet, money was the greatest test of society. Every community has a fitna. The fitna of my community is wealth. In the early years of Islam, Muslims did not disrupt the established economic order in the lands they conquered. In the markets, the gold solidi of Byzantium and the silver drachmas of the Sassanid Empire were still jingling. In fact, in the transitional period, coins called Arab Sassanid or Arab Byzantine, the portrait of the Sassanid king stood on one side, while a small Bismillah inscription was added to the other. However, this hybrid order ended with one of the most interesting diplomatic crises in history during the reign of the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik. In 696 CE, a letter war broke out between the Byzantine Emperor Justinian II and Caliph Abd al-Malik over the Islamic inscriptions on the papyri coming from Egypt. Justinian threatened the Caliph, "If you do not abandon these expressions, I will have things written on Byzantine coins about your prophet that will anger you." This threat ignited the fuse of independence for Islamic money. Abd al-Malik erased the images of those ancient kings, the Sassanid fire altars, and the Byzantine crosses, on the coins in a single move, In their place he engraved verses proclaiming the unity of Allah and the essence of Islam, and the Shahada, with an aesthetic Kufic script into the heart of the coin. This was a revolution in numismatic history. Money was now based not on an image but on a text. These pure gold dinars, weighing 4.25 grams, called mithqal, and elegant silver dirhams launched a tradition that was imageless but loaded with words. The name Denarius, inherited from Rome, evolved into dinar here. These new coins were not just a medium of exchange, but like a political manifesto that defined the boundaries of Islam. Across the vast geography from Al-Andalus to Central Asia, those elegant lines on money represented not only economic power, but also an unshakable belief in Tawhid. This written adventure of money would continue to be the gold and silver signature of Islamic civilization for centuries. In the Islamic world, money was not just a medium of exchange, but a huge show of power demonstrating the splendor and generosity of the state. During the Fatimid period that ruled Egypt, this splendor materialized on Thursday lentil feast days. The 10,000 gold harubas distributed to state officials were not just salaries but a sign of the caliphate's endless wealth. The source of this wealth was the gold rivers coming from the depths of the Sahara Desert. In the 10th century, the city of Sijil Massa, where West African gold flowed, was beating like the golden heart of the world. The city's administrator earned a full 400,000 dinars per year. That is, approximately 1.7 tons of pure gold. The historian Makrizi, who lived during the time of the Ayyubid Sultan Saladin, describes the shocking effect of gold on people as follows. Mentioning the name of a pure gold dinar is like talking about his wife to a jealous husband. Owning such a coin is like entering the gates of paradise. By the 15th century, Mediterranean trade witnessed a new competition. The Mamluk Sultan Barzbey, as a rival to the Venetian Doge who dominated trade, minted the famous gold coin he named Ashrafi in 1425. This was a page written in gold of the financial power struggle between East and West. In Iran, the Mongol Ilkhanids embarked on one of history's riskiest experiments. Inspired by the Chinese model, they tried to force into circulation paper money they called chow. However, the people, who had a metal money tradition thousands of years old, did not trust these pieces of paper, and this first fiat money attempt resulted in great failure. The Ottomans, on the other hand, elevated money to both an economic and artistic peak in a vast geography extending from Egypt to the Balkans. During the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Akçe jingling in every corner of the empire was the lifeblood of the system. The daily wage of Sinan, the chief architect of the world empire, was determined as 55 Akçe. However, what made Ottoman money truly unique was the elegant tugras on it. Kanuni's magnificent tugra with Han written on it transformed money from being merely a commercial tool into one of the world's most magnificent works of calligraphy art. On the exotic trade routes of the East, on the shores of the Indian Ocean, there was a completely different scene. The strange-looking lari coins made by the Safavids from twisted silver wires, resembling hooks, had become indispensable for overseas trade. Money was now connecting the world in every form, every language, and every color. Now, we are turning to the great change appearing on the horizon, to the silver tsunami that will come from the American continent and the inevitable victory of paper money. In the 16th century, the world was shaken by one of the greatest monetary shocks in history. The Spanish discovery of the American continent brought not gold, but a silver tsunami to Europe. The enormous silver piles extracted from the Potosi mines in Bolivia crossed the oceans with Spanish galleons and gave birth to the first real global currency that connected the whole world, the Spanish dollar, 8 reales. These silvers were so powerful that they opened every door from the palaces of Europe to the silk markets of China. However, this uncontrolled silver inflow also brought with it a massive inflation called the price revolution to Europe. The Spanish economy paid a heavy price for spending without producing. The thinker González de Chelarigo made a painful observation in 1600 that would go down in history. Spain is poor because it is rich. The mines were coming, but the money was not invested but spent on endless religious wars and luxury. Gold and silver did not always bring wealth. Sometimes they were just an illusion. In the midst of this cash storm, minds that wanted to escape the cumbersome nature of metal took the dangerous but ingenious step that would give birth to the modern economy, paper money. In 1661, the Swede Johann Palmstruch, with the Stockholm Banco he founded, printed Europe's first paper banknotes. When it became impossible to carry the enormously heavy copper plates, dollar, used in Sweden, Palmstruch offered kreditivsedlar, that is, credit notes, as an alternative to these heavy metals. However, the unbacked printing of these papers led to the first modern bank bankruptcy in history, and Palmstruch's condemnation to death. Modern economy was learning the price of trusting paper in such a harsh way for the first time. The second great gambler of paper money was the Scotsman John Law. In 1720, Law founded the Mississippi Company in France based on paper money and convinced the French people that paper pieces were equal to gold. However, when this enormous bubble burst, thousands of people lost their fortunes and Law barely escaped with his life from the angry crowd. Money had now turned from being just a metal into a war of faith and psychology. With the Industrial Revolution, an attempt was made to bring logic to this complexity. In 1776, Adam Smith changed the source of value in his work, The Wealth of Nations. According to him, value no longer came only from metal. The real source of value was the labor spent on an object. However, the ruthlessness of this new system showed itself in Victorian London. In the grey world criticized in Charles Dickens' novels, everything was reduced to just a number and profit. The harshest reaction to this emotionless face of the system came from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Marx, in the Communist Manifesto he wrote in 1848, cried out with these shocking words how money mechanized human relations. The bourgeoisie has torn apart the bonds that tied people to their natural superiors, and left no other bond between people than cold and emotionless cash payment. Humanity, in its journey that began with barter thousands of years ago, was now approaching an end where the fetishization of commodities took place, and money came before everything. The 20th century was the era in which the bloodiest and most destructive tests in the history of money took place. World wars destroyed not only borders, but also economic balances that had continued for centuries. The enormous 132 billion mark reparations imposed on Germany after the First World War gave birth to the most terrible hyperinflation monster in history. By 1923, it had reached a point that challenged the imagination. One gold mark had become equal to exactly 75 trillion paper marks. While describing the horror of those days, the writer Stefan Zweig notes that in Austria, the price of a single egg was equivalent to the price of a luxury car of the old days. The value of money was falling so fast that people were going to the bakery to buy bread with wheelbarrows full of banknotes. This chaos also marked the end of the gold standard, which had been the unshakable pillar of the economy for centuries. A new genius rose from within this collapse, the British economist John Maynard Keynes. With his general theory published in 1936, he rewrote the rules of capitalism. According to Keynes, the state should no longer be a spectator, but a captain intervening in the economy and money supply. The Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 established that new world order that placed the American dollar at the center and laid the foundations of today's global financial system. But the evolution of money did not stop here. In the early 1950s, the small embarrassment experienced by Frank McNamara at a dinner in New York when he forgot his wallet gave birth to an idea that would change the world: Diners Club. Those small plastic cards that replaced money transformed money from something in our pockets into electronic data flowing at the speed of light in fiber optic cables. D.H. Robertson's visionary observation made in 1928 is still valid today. The value of that yellow metal, gold, which was chosen as money because it aroused the curiosity of savages, is now too uncertain and inappropriate to serve as a basis for the value of our money. As J.K. Galbraith also emphasized, money now has its own independent and absolute personality. This abstract power that we invented with our own hands, but which today writes the fate of the whole world, states, and billions of people, is actually our deepest mirror. This journey extending from Karl Marx to Hammurabi, from Lydian lion-stamped coins to the raffia cloths of the Lele people in the Congo, is not the story of metals, but the story of humanity's own ambitions, tragedies, and the civilizations it built. The history of money is the story of humanity. And this story continues to be rewritten every day with a new digital code, a new faith, and a new crisis. In this ancient journey, only one question remains: do we control money, or does money control us? Perhaps as we turn the new pages of this atlas together, we will get one step closer to the answer to this question. Thank you for accompanying us on this extraordinary journey through the history of money. If this video offered you a new perspective, please support the channel by subscribing to the Mankind Atlas, liking the video, and turning on the notification bell. May your mind stay clear and your days full of insight. And always remember, latet enim veritas, sed nihil pretiosius veritati.